Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore Pluto's station in direct on the 11th of October 2023. Pluto's actually been retracing its steps for the last 23 weeks. But not all of that time has it been in the sign of Capricorn, only the last 17 and a half weeks. The 6 weeks before then, it was in Aquarius. Because if you recall, Pluto made its way into Aquarius on the 23rd of March. But it slammed on the brakes on the 1st of May and inversed back into Capricorn on the 11th of June. I'm going to just share with you about the archetypes of Pluto in Aquarius, then its retrograde through Capricorn, what that means, because the symbolism of this is absolutely incredibly powerful for us all, personkind. And then we have, in just 14 and a half weeks time, we have Pluto arriving back in Aquarius, incredibly on its birthday, the 21st of January. And it's going to be there through to the 2nd of September when we have its final journey through Capricorn in this phase. And it's going to be back into Aquarius from the 19th of November for 20 years through to March the 9th, 2043. So please stay with me for this. I'm going to go through those archetypes, but I'm also going to share with you the event chart, because when this event begins, the two rulers of Scorpio, Mars, the traditional ruler, Pluto, the higher octave modern ruler, they're in a mighty right angle, which is in itself an incredibly potent influence. But there are some other influences I'm going to share too, but that will give us a flavour of what we can expect over this next 14 and a half weeks. And then I'll share each of the 12 signs to give you an overview in terms of the sun or the ascendant. Which you choose to watch is down to you. But before I begin, I'd like to share with you a unique opportunity. Year 2023 is now speeding by, the new year racing towards us. If you give me 3 pieces of your personal birth data, or 2 if you don't know your time, I'll produce for you your forecast for year 2024, but also I'll prepare for you the rest of year 2023 free of charge. But in my special package of 30% off, you can also get your life roadmap, your character analysis, which will give you a much greater and more intimate understanding of the patterns that have played out in your life so far. These charts are completely individual to the person they're produced for. Please see the link below. So Pluto goes direct on the 11th of October at 1:09 and 30 seconds AM Universal Central Time, but at 27 degrees and 53 minutes. When Pluto started its retrograde, it was at 0 degrees and 21 minutes in Aquarius, but it returned to Capricorn, as I said before, on the 11th of June. It will return, as I mentioned, on its birthday, the 21st of January 2024. So this retrograde represents, and it happens annually, around about 44% of the year. So it's a huge chunk. And just in that period of time, the 11 weeks when Pluto was in Aquarius, 6 of which were in retrograde, there was an incredible emphasis. I really felt it was quite staggering on artificial intelligence. Now we know AI has been around for some time, certainly automation and robotics, but the focus on them was so incredible. And that's the power of Pluto, because Pluto is very much about regeneration. It can be about things that are dying and making way and renewal, but sadly, of course, it can be about the dark arts, the things that are hidden, the techniques that are used to hold us in some kind of way, which essentially is a form of coercion, could be leverage, could be done in very subtly manipulative ways. And so these unseen forces are something to really be reckoned with. But Pluto can be about breaking down what's old, what's served its time. And the sign of Capricorn is very much about the establishment, but it's also about big structures, big organizations, can be about big buildings. A classic way that I feel that we're seeing the decline of a very Capricornian totem would be shopping centres. Now, this may not be true for all the countries in the world, but I certainly feel it's true for Britain, and I've read it is true in some parts of the States as well. So shopping centres is where people have been able to go and buy goods, all these different shops together, and it's become a socially enjoyable expedition. So it's not just about getting the practical benefits from the goods, it's something to enjoy, have a coffee, have a wander, a drink, a meal. Why not? And the best and the biggest of these will probably continue to prosper. But in the United Kingdom, an awful lot of shopping centres are literally dying. But there are reasons for this, because the opportunity that they once had has changed because the world has changed around it. Very Plutonian. So the internet's come along, people order a lot more stuff online. But we've also seen a very permissive government in the United Kingdom, which has given planning permission to all sorts of stores outside of those shopping centres, which has weakened them. Then they've pushed up the cost of rates, so that businesses have to pay for things like street lighting, refuse collection, all those good things, policing, traffic wardens and all the rest of it. All those costs got really pushed up, which made it much more difficult to stay competitive when you've got a retail presence, when you've got all the costs that go with that, the physical costs of insurances and public liability and obviously staffing costs, and you've got to make sure that the accommodation is updated and fresh. All this costs a lot of money. So you've got people who are selling online, they're much more nimble, they don't have those costs, but nor do they have the burden of taxation, because no one's really got to grip with how the world has changed. So you could say the Capricornian big establishments have in some ways failed to be flexible enough to understand how Pluto and we are changing our shopping habits. But there's also been some political influence here. I genuinely do believe this is not a political message. It's just that I feel that government, certainly in the United Kingdom, haven't understood enough about the fabric of community. So if you keep building stores all over the place, just because, well, we have a light touch for regulation, that's not good for the stores that are already open. So you essentially end up with too much choice. And actually, then, as there's a decline, you end up with less choice because only the very strongest survive. How crazy is that? So there's been a lack of astuteness in some ways. They haven't used their authority and their wisdom in the right ways. They've actually got suckered. So someone's making some money somewhere, aren't they? But that's an idea of how I see a very Capricornian structure, a shopping centre. So now you see a lot of empty units, you see a lot of people who have nowhere to live, bless them. You have a lot of people begging, again, awful to see, because there's not been enough investment in social property. Another political decision, because property is still very Capricornian, but the old concept of Capricornianism, which was based on paternalism, making sure that everybody got a little bit of what they needed, even if it may have felt patronising, that's gone as well. It's a free-for-all. So even the people who own the premises to rent out are now very much seeing it as basically, this wouldn't be true of every landlord, but a lot of landlords will be taking an opportunity to be opportunistic to push prices up to their tenants just because inflation has gone up. But I doubt that their costs have always gone up to the same level that those rents are being pushed to, because it's sheer unadulterated greed. And that's the downside of Pluto in Capricorn. So I feel over these next 14 and a half weeks, and then the 11 and a half weeks when Pluto goes through Capricorn from the 2nd of September, we are going to see anything that's still remaining in terms of the more positive side of structures will persist for the long term. But I think we're going to see a lot of other things really finally making way. Now, you could say, for example, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, very much the keeper, if you like, of tradition. That's being battered by political interest, but also because the world's changing. People don't necessarily want to watch terrestrial TV. They want to watch films, and they want to pay a subscription service or not. And so the BBC, which has done lots of very good paternalistic things, like provide the world service in different languages so people can get some context of what's going on in the world, that's all being now defunded. It's not relevant, doesn't make money. You've got to get by on less. And yet, because we're caught up with this obsession with show business and status and glamour to some degree, the big presenters are all earning an awful lot of money. So the BBC, in a way, losing its identity, but also degenerating. The royal family, that's in a big state of change. Russian expansionism, I'm probably going to trigger some reactions here, but did you know that all the countries that Russia did occupy, or wants to reoccupy, they didn't used to occupy? So Russian expansionism has been something that's been going on a very long time. And this time when they tried it, they've ended up with a very big bloody nose. But as we know in wars, lots of people suffer, lots of people make money, the arms industry, but it's not a very happy situation. But what would you do if you were in the Ukrainian shoes? They're fighting for their identity, and they don't see themselves as Russian, even if they got some shared roots. So, as I say, that might be a little bit controversial, but that could be a pushback against that very authoritarian, which can be Capricornian. You will do what we say. You know, and for some poor souls in Russia, that means getting sent to the war in Ukraine, whether they want to or not, basically being pulled off the streets. That's not good stuff, is it? But I think it's also important to understand that whether we're talking about big corporate business in America or China or the United Kingdom or big banking organisations, that all may need to change. And to welcome Pluto's arrival in Aquarius, it's not going to be a panacea. And anybody who thinks it's going to be a panacea is really not being realistic. And the reason for this is that Aquarius has a duality. Its traditional rulership is Saturn. So, and it's also a fixed sign, so it appreciates continuity, it appreciates tradition, and it appreciates the roots of things that have some decency attached to them. But it also has that Uranian side to its nature, which I think a lot of popular astrology is basically focused on. So being a bit zany, being very far-sighted, maybe changeable, quirky, and so forth. I've got a lot of Aquarius, but that Capricornian or Saturnian side of Aquarius shouldn't be forgotten. So we have an opportunity with Pluto in Aquarius to maintain the best of some of the big structures, make them work better, update them like the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, but at the same time be more open-minded and progressive about how we can change things. But the reason I don't think it's going to be a panacea is that Aquarius can be very cold, detached, logical. It's an air sign. And also, it obviously works well with technology in a way that perhaps Capricorn struggled with at times, but that also can mean that we start to see people losing their jobs due to those technological advances. And I actually think one of the great things about Capricornian energy is that work, for most people, if they're able, gives us a sense of purpose. It also gives us a sense of identity. If that gets taken away, because a machine or some technology is able to fulfill a process that a human was fulfilling before, it doesn't always work. A classic example, I'm not sure if you're into football at all, or soccer as you would call it in the States, but in Europe now we have a lot of technology. So we have video replays of particular incidents. But you know, it seems to have made the game a lot worse because it's taken the humanity out of it, and mistakes are still being made. So maybe we should just have it about whether the ball goes over the line and just let it flow freely through the human dimension, which comes, of course, from the referee, who may, of course, make some mistakes. I was watching my team last night. The ref missed a clear-cut penalty. We probably would have won the game if that had been given and had been scored. So, of course, that's part of the human experience. It's not always perfect. And Aquarius energy, that logicalness, is going to see quite a few situations develop over the next few years, I feel, where we may collectively come together, or we may have more individual rights to manifest what makes us so fresh and interesting, very Aquarius, but ultimately we are still connected. So the sign of Aquarius is very futuristic for sure, but with one foot still in the past, or about the values and the standards of how we're connected to one another. Also, Aquarius energy, of course, can be very much about communities, can be about collaboration, cooperation. It has three rulers, obviously the two rulers of Aquarius itself, but the sub-rulerships, along with Saturn and Uranus, are Mercury in the second decan and Venus in the third. So Mercury, again, very cool, logical, quick-witted. So we're going to have to experience a big shift in society even from where we are now. And I don't necessarily think it's going to be as perfect as some people hope. So we need to have some legislation, for example, over AI. So it's not just a free market, because we can see with free markets with British retail, there's been a disaster for society. So we have shops everywhere and big hubs at the middle of towns and cities that are actually literally dying on their feet, very Plutonian, which is incredibly sad. So they need to be repurposed in a more imaginative way. I've seen what goes on in France. Their city centres are incredible because they're less obsessed with online shopping. They're more into the cultural side of things, having a coffee, relaxing, walking around. You go into shops there's so many staff, it's unbelievable. In Britain we don't have any staff because it's all about stripping out the cost. So it doesn't have to be all negative, but maybe those shopping centres can be repurposed into community hubs. What was retail premises changed into places for people to live, places above shops. There was a scheme many years ago that Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall came up with, which was brilliant, which is getting access to the back of accommodation above shops that's lain empty for years. That is the type of thing we may see with Pluto in Aquarius. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavour of what I feel is going to be shifting and happening. But I just want to tell you about how I see Pluto happening within us, because I think it is incredibly powerful. Sometimes the things we don't want to let go of, Pluto will take from us, whether we like it or not. It's one of the most painful things you can possibly go through. If you're someone who really works at personal development and you enjoy astrology, you can work with Pluto in a really pragmatic but positive way to try to really get in touch with the deeper truth of who we are, because Pluto can, weirdly, ironically, be about the deepest truth of where we really need to be. So an archetype would be someone whose partner tells them they no longer want to be with them. They're devastated. But then after a while they start to rebuild their life and they find that actually they've rekindled their whole persona, and it's actually liberated them. The other person rings up a year later and said, listen, you know, I really didn't realise what I had. Can we give this another go? The other person's moved on. They're not necessarily being mean when they say, I'm really sorry. This actually really ignited within me a freshness, an experience where I'm much more in touch with what's truly right for me. Pluto can work like that. And then, of course, Pluto sometimes can bring really difficult things our way. I pretty well knew the Queen would die because with Pluto moving into Aquarius, it squared up her sun, her natal sun. That's a very difficult aspect to survive in your 90s. It's a very challenging aspect to have when you're younger, to be honest, around health. Something will change in your life when Pluto squares the sun, the progressed Pluto on the sun, the progressed sun on the natal Pluto. These are very, very challenging aspects. But also, of course, Pluto can be about pushing us to make the most of our potential. So when people have Jupiter-Pluto connections in their natal chart, they often will be a force to be reckoned with and often end up really quite wealthy too. So let's just now briefly look at that event chart wheel based on a solar chart, so the ascendant at 0 degrees Aries, so we can all collectively relate to this. So Pluto is at 27 degrees and 53 minutes in Capricorn in the 10th house, but it's in that T-square with Mars at 29 degrees in the sign of Libra, but we also have the South Node at 24, nearly 25. So we have a T-square. So, of course, this has been going on between Pluto and the nodal axis pretty well since the 17th of July, when the true node reversed into the sign of Aries for the first time in 17 years. But we also have Pluto in a quincunx, really challenging influence, with Venus. So 150 degree angle. Venus, of course, not at its best in Virgo, it's in its fall. But we do have a grand Earth trine between Pluto, the Sun-Moon midpoint at 26 degrees and 58 minutes in Virgo, and the glorious and rather erratic Uranus at 22 degrees and 20 minutes in Taurus. So that's super. So if we want to transform our resources, we can do it if we're open to change, and if we recognise the best bits of Pluto in Capricorn, which is stability, persistence, hard work, sustained effort, patience, being reliable, being really quite conserving of our resources, so not being wasteful, a little bit of thrift. So we can transform our physical resources from this big pressure we've all been under the last couple of years if we're open to embracing that energy of Taurus. But we do also have Venus being clattered by Saturn in a direct opposition. So because Venus, of course, can be about money, Saturn in Pisces is tough going for sure. We also need to try and stay as logical as possible. Saturn in Pisces can see us, particularly with Neptune there, a little bit swamped with options or our more spiritual expectations which may not be met. So that's more challenging for sure. So when it comes to relationships, if you're in a relationship where you feel that a lot of power is applied on the tie, but not necessarily in an obvious way, you know, you do feel a bit coerced somehow, or someone gets very jealous very easily, or doesn't really want you to be so much of a free spirit, or however sacrificing you are, Venus in Virgo, it's never enough. Think about that relationship again, seriously. But that clash, taking out the big takeout between Pluto and Mars, you are going to see, along with me, some very big names coming down. I've looked at the progress chart of a certain person that you would know who I'm talking about without naming him, and his progressed moon is conjunct Jupiter in Libra, late Libra. So it's caught up in this event in a really major way. I would also say if you're somebody who's a cardinal sign, Aries, Cancer, Libra or Capricorn, or you're very early Aquarius, Taurus like the Queen was, Leo or Scorpio, this is a very big time. There's no doubt about it. So the next year, a huge time of change, and trying to resist it for resistance sake just isn't going to work. So we all need to take the lead from our wonderful Scorpionic friends and understand that sometimes life is about very consistent situations that give us a degree of security, but sometimes they will change very radically and very quickly, and it can be scary and it can be challenging, but actually, a bit like the anecdote I shared with you, can release us to reimagine ourselves, renew, very Plutonian, renew ourselves in a much more meaningful way. And that's the opportunity of Aquarius that's come in next year for all but those 11 weeks from the 21st of January. So we have 11 plus 3, my maths isn't great, you can tell. 14 weeks of next year we have Capricorn, and the rest will be Aquarius. So it's up to us to set some boundaries, but accept some changes, but know we're in for a big journey of complete evolution for person kind. Please stay with me for your zodiac forecast from Aries through to Pisces next. So Aries, for you, the next 14 and a half weeks is going to see you actively considering your role in life. Now, the traditional format for that was very much what we did for a living. But it hasn't always been like that. People didn't always necessarily see themselves as tycoons or entrepreneurs or doing a side hustle. So a lot of it's to do with our identity. It's where we feel respected, where we're trying to build our esteem. So whether it is around community interaction, voluntary activities, playing with your grandchildren if you have them, or it is to do with a real burning desire to transform what you do for a paid job, that's going to come very sharply into focus for you through to the 21st of January. And if something isn't working for you, it may need to make way. And sometimes the things that we think are really important to us, once we actually get to them and we've attained that particular goal or ambition, which is very 10th house Capricornian, we actually realize that we're evolving into something else, which is that 11th house. We want to move on and to basically to elevate ourselves in some kind of more spiritual dimension. So even if there is something you've worked for years on in a very patient and persistent and committed way, even if you have gained tangible success for that and you do have the respect of your peers, it could be you that starts to change within yourself about what you next want from your life. So Pluto can be complex, and of course the sign of Capricorn can also be about an appreciation of those things. So you may be someone who's perfectly happy in your particular accommodation, your particular role. But just remember that even if we're perfectly happy with how the status quo is, what's around us, the environment, is constantly changing, and no one has control over that, not one single person on the planet. So we all need to stay mindful of how Pluto impacts outside of us, but also inside of us at a more spiritual level. So Taurus, since 2008, if you've grasped the opportunity, and I think a lot of Tauran people have, something in your situation has altered. And it's altered in a way which may have surprised you, particularly over the last 4.5 years, with the help of the planet of, let's say, disruption, Uranus, which has been applying in a trine by sign to the energy of Pluto in Capricorn, and of course now they're actually talking to each other in this trine, on that grand trine, with the midpoint, the Sun Moon midpoint on the chart for this event in Virgo. You can see just how far you've come, just how far that being open to amending things or learning new studies or gaining new perspectives or travelling, enriching yourself in some kind of way, a more broadened cultural appreciation. All of these things may have come about from Pluto, or maybe you haven't moved at all, and what's actually changed is you become even more passionate about the values you already had. And that's entirely possible, because the 9th house can be about demonstrating our beliefs. But I feel that what's going to happen from now through to the 21st of January is there can be a test or there can be an opportunity. Perhaps there be both. It depends on your unique situation. Someone could challenge you if they feel that you're a bit set in your ways and they feel that you are ventilating your viewpoint without necessarily being quite so open to their viewpoint. So that kind of dimension could come up. Or you may decide that after resisting change for a long time because you really have a great appreciation of continuity, that you actually think, do you know, I'm just going to let go and see where it takes me. And that can prove to be incredibly exciting, exhilarating, but perhaps maybe a little bit challenging as well. But that grand Earth trine at the root of this event really does give you a fantastic chance to try to make some changes. What about the role of Mars? Well, Mars for you is in the part of your situation that's very much to do with the practicalities of life. So it may be that something you want to embrace, which is exciting, you may feel conflicted because there's another part of your existence where you feel that you have to be dutiful. And Taurus people often have a great appreciation of going through the processes, being very reliable, being that solid citizen. So you may feel a bit conflicted, and that could create some tensions within you. They may not necessarily come from outside of you, but if you are someone who really likes to try out different things, you know, if you have key inner planets in Aries and Gemini, which is entirely possible, you may be someone who has a much greater appreciation of change than the archetype for Taurus. But I feel that your world view, your values can come under a degree of pressure over the next 14 weeks, but also something very exciting can shift in a really dramatic way. So Gemini, for you, since 2008, there's been a tremendous amount of psychological potential change. And when I say psychological, I mean right at the root of your being. There may be some parts of your nature that have almost metaphorically died and be rebirthed. Sounds very powerful, doesn't it? But the reason for this is the quincunx between the Sun in your sign and the position of Pluto. Now, it depends, of course, where the Sun is for you, and if you have other planets or your ascendant in Gemini, if they're still being actively connected to Pluto, or if it's just by a whole sign activation. So for you, the 8th house can, of course, be very much to do with money, can be to do with earning, business, can be to do with intimacy, sexuality, very close relationships, investments. And all of those areas may have gone through quite the change. And particularly over the last 4.5 years, as Uranus has come along into your 12th house and shook things up tremendously, fiercely. And at times it may have felt really quite baffling, even overwhelming, I feel. But I think you've learnt a lot, or had an opportunity to learn a lot, about maybe just coming out of that part of your nature that is more airy and very, very quick-witted, and actually experiencing life in a much more invested way. So if you've learnt a lot about psychology, human nature, other people's motivations and your own over the last years, it really wouldn't be a surprise, and I think all of that can come up to the boil. If money and earning money has proved to be a problem, I think you're going to get a much clearer idea of where things stand over this next 14.5 weeks. But it may be that you need to evolve onto something that's different. But I think the understanding that you've gained, even if it has been very difficult or painful, maybe there has been some big transitions around close, intimate relationships, for example. I feel that where you're heading will be a good place for you, because you're moving into the air triplicity from the 21st of January for a much longer period next year, which is very, very exciting. So Cancer, the last 15 years, 16 years, so much about relationships, as I think you know. Now the 7th house can be about how we relate. can be about our expectations in terms of partnership, but it also can be where we can compete. You've got a reputation of being someone who likes a degree of spiritual calm and making sure that your environment feels safe. So sometimes when things don't feel so good, possibly even around relationships, your tendency can be to withdraw and to protect. But what surprised you over this last 15 years is how much at times you may have gone on the front foot and tackled your competitors, or been much more up for some kind of fierce engagement. Pluto activates things within us that perhaps we couldn't have even possibly recognised when we were younger, because maybe there has been at times when you've had to be very firm, almost to the point of innately ruthless at times, to separate yourself from people that don't really fit what you want. But also, Pluto in the 7th house can be about opportunities, and if you've yet to feel that an opportunity has really come along to bless you in terms of a partner that you can really relate to in an incredibly important way, you have this next 14 and a half weeks, then you have that third 11 weeks, 11 and a half weeks, from the 2nd of September next year, where something big can shift around relationships. But if you are encountering some power struggles with colleagues, friends, family members, perhaps even business partnerships, or in a romantic tie, it wouldn't be a surprise, because Pluto is about power. And if you've got planets towards the end of Cancer, you're going to be feeling this energy in a much more furnace-like way. But once Pluto moves into the 8th house, the conversation, which is the 7th house, which of course is very Libran, becomes much deeper. It becomes a much more sensory experience, because the 8th house is very scorpionic. So although Pluto itself will be in Aquarius, for you an even greater transformation is possible in the years that are going to go on, apart from those 11 weeks at the end of next year, for the next 20 rotations of the Sun round the Earth. So very, very potent time awaits from the 21st of January next year. So Leo, over the last 15 years, I think you may have surprised yourself by the lengths you've gone to be supportive of others. It's not to say you couldn't be supportive before. You can be one of the most generous and kind-spirited of all the zodiac signs. But some of the things you've had to support people around have been more about the nuts and bolts side of life. You know, the areas that are to do with those small but important details, collecting people from school, perhaps providing the domestic environment to support others, and in some way or another working in a role which had a degree of regularity or precision to it. Now, your sign is ruled by the Sun. You are, without doubt, the most brightly shining zodiac sign there is. But what you've been doing has been really noble. And I feel that what it's done is given you a huge appreciation of the inner workings of life. But I feel that the inner workings of life are not necessarily completely enough for you, because details may have been something that you've become very accustomed to managing, very much with aplomb, but it's not very dramatic. So what's going to happen between now and the 21st of January is, I think that certain things that you've been working on, perhaps it's understanding your health needs more, working in terms of getting a home or a family unit really functioning in a very efficient way, learning particular skills in your work. But what's going to happen from the 21st of January is it all gets much more focused on relationships. And that's going to be the story for the following 20 years, apart from that brief interlude from the 2nd of September next year for 11 and a half weeks. So Virgo, having Pluto in your 5th house is really been interesting. I'm sure that there are talents and creative expressions that you've got that have changed with enormous power over the last 15 years. There may have been some big stuff that's gone on in your relationship sector as well, particularly from 2/12 when Neptune moved into your sector relationships. But you know, there's a dual process in play at the moment. Once Pluto moves into Aquarius on the 21st of January, goes to house 6, but Saturn is active in house 7. The small things that maybe define you in some ways, your appreciation of those little details that other people sometimes miss, often is your great gift. You know, you have an ability to work with things in a way which makes something bigger and better, and can often be extremely supportive to others. But in your romantic situation, if there isn't a sense that you're really appreciated for some of the support or encouragement you provide, I feel that a test could be developing from the 21st of January. Of course, you had a stack load of planets in your 12th house in 2023, which may have rocked things at times. So there could be a bit more of a challenge that's going to come, or you're going to take the next step in the journey. You know, it's not just about the creative side, it's about making some of your ideas come alive with that sense of appreciation you have for going through the processes, being very practical, being very focused, being very applied and patient, and something that you're really good at can be taken forwards from this period now and into next year, where you're wanting to actually push yourself a lot more to make the most of your talents. And perhaps it is stepping out of that role of being the supporter. You know, you're so good at that. Maybe the person you need to support most of all from now and for the rest of 2024 is you and your aspirations. So Libra, Pluto in the 4th house. How many times have you and I had this conversation? At times, I felt like I'm a broken record. And recently somebody said that I didn't define, when I was speaking about particular matters, I didn't define the house enough. Or if I defined the house, I didn't say this and I didn't say that. And I explained to them that with very long transits like Pluto, there is only so much variety of language that I can use to keep it interesting and engaging, because it has been around so long and it is so difficult. You know, we're going to see a situation later this month when the Sun squares up to Pluto for you. And obviously, well, for everyone, but it's going to be particularly important for you. And of course, you have Mars in your sign at the present time, along with the Sun. Neither at their absolute best in the sign of Libra, technically. But for you, it's a chance to show what you are about as an individual. But are you still having to deal with people who are resistant to your emotional needs? If the answer is yes, I feel you're reaching a crunch point with Mars being caught up in this right angle with Pluto, and also your ruler Venus in your 12th house being afflicted by Pluto. If there are things you're deeply unhappy about, however much we've been rehearsing the themes between us over these years, with my Libra and Ascendant, Venus is also conjunct the Moon in my chart, so a very Venusian person, if you like, very tuned in to other people. But you know, if our voices don't feel heard, this may be the time when you do have to be much more ruthless in some ways to stand your ground over what is really important. But once Pluto moves into Aquarius for much of next year, all but those 11 and a half weeks from the 21st of January, the first 3 weeks as well, I feel that is really going to be the start of a new epoch. And obviously, once Pluto returns back to Aquarius on the 19th of November next year, it is there for a very, very long time. So if you're looking for romance, if you're looking for passion, if you're looking to be heard about your talents, next year is going to be a phenomenal opportunity. But if you have been trying to box some kind of situation for yourself that preserves your peace of mind, your tranquility, you feel secure, you feel respected around your emotional world, great, you've really worked so hard to achieve that. But just be aware, with Mars in the mix, you may still have to push back in order to get some people to really understand that you are someone that must be respected, as well as liked. So Scorpio, for you, your two ruling planets clash as your higher octave ruler Pluto returns into its forward motion. If you have been finding it very, very frustrating over the last 17 and a half weeks when it comes to getting other people to be open to the messages you have, the ideas you have, if you're someone who's really interested in new media, for example, you're a writer or you're a trainer, a teacher, and it hasn't felt that everyone's getting what you've got to say, you have a great opportunity over these next 14 and a half weeks to turn up the volume. But because Mars is in your 12th house, someone can also turn up the volume on you. So something that's been simmering beneath the surface could explode into the surface over this next 14 and a half weeks. And it may end up being a difficult conversation. The dialogue may not be easy if there are some sensitive subjects that need to be discussed. Then again, perhaps the sensitive subjects that need to be discussed or thought about are entirely with yourself. If you've not really been staying in touch with your inner world, your inner evolution, there could be a furnace of unsettled and unhappy energy that you need to think about, Pluto in the third house, and work out and evolve. And if you're not prepared to do that, you could at the present time feel very on edge, full of pent-up frustration and emotion. And that needs to go somewhere, otherwise it's not going to be good for you. So do try to get in touch with the things that are psychologically outstanding from the past that may need resolving and clearing out and coming to peace with. But just be aware that some people can surprisingly oppose you from completely unexpected angles. But also, if you haven't felt particularly heard of late, I feel you do have an opportunity to be much more persuasive and much more successful in conveying your ideas through to the 21st of January. So Sagittarius, Pluto in the second house for such a long time. If you've had to really fight tooth and nail around your earnings since 2008, or it's been a shifting scene in terms of the foundations of your life, it really wouldn't be a surprise. Mars now in your 11th house is very much about friendship, connections to others, our higher virtues and principles. The second house is much more earthy, it's much more Tauran. It can be quite sensual, it can be about the need for our desires to be met. So some kind of philosophical clash because of Mars's square with Pluto could go on between you and someone who maybe you have been a friend with in the past. You may be rethinking whether you can be a friend with them in the future. But also if you've been battling away, trying to get that foundation down that really is steady enough to then build something on top of that, by the 21st of January, I think you have a great opportunity to finally get something to where you want it to be, which gives you the kind of permanence. I say that in inverted commas with Pluto, because obviously something's always shifting with Pluto, the outer or the inner, but something a bit more solid that is within reach. So keep pushing towards that prize. So Capricorn, with Pluto in your sign, it does depend where your sun is or other inner planets, but if you are born right in the last 3 or 4 degrees of Capricorn, you probably have felt that you've been really in it. Some kind of big transformation is going on. Sometimes, and I have, I should say, Pluto sat on my sun in the early part of this year, and it's going to go back there, of course, on the 21st of January. If you want to send me birthday cards, you're very, very welcome. Pluto applying to the sun can really be life-changing. Of course, it depends on what house your sun is in the sign of Capricorn, 1 to 12. Or it could depend on how much you invest your faith in the sun sign astrology as opposed to the more natal astrology. It just depends on other planets that may have been affected since 2008. But I feel if your main way of manifesting your individuality does come more towards the end of Capricorn, this is an incredibly powerful time. If you're born earlier in Capricorn, you may have gone through quite a lot of the big changes that we're going to unfold right at the beginning. So if your sun is right at the start, you know, around about the winter solstice, you would have felt the big change that these latter-born goats are going to experience now, as long ago as 2008, 2007, when it was latterly in Sagittarius. So it does depend on those things. But of course, then there are the evolving planets, the progressions and the directions. But I feel that the first house is very much about individuality, but your sign is very much at times about upholding the status quo, the established order. So what you've been really pushed to do since 2008 is to take more care of your needs as an individual and not really be so caught up in playing by not necessarily the rules, but just by meeting other people's expectations. You may have been given away your power to some degree, so you've been asked to really focus on the more ego part of your potential. But the ego part of our potential still has to be worked with in a very appropriate way. Otherwise, obviously, it would mean that we weren't necessarily leading our life in a particularly well-balanced way. So if you're someone who's a creative and you're in a role that's as dull as ditch water, and you really still want to manifest your talents and skills and artistry, the next 14 and a half weeks, go for it big time. Don't wait. Don't sit on your hands. Don't be so caught up in conducting your life in a routine way which meets the wider expectations in a way that doesn't meet your inner needs. Aquarius, Pluto in the 12th house, what can we say? Particularly when you've got a lot of Aquarius like I have. And you know, a lot of people have shared this stuff on YouTube with me about how difficult the last years have been. Pluto moving through the 12th solar house. Some astrologers, of course, would scorn this approach to astrology and say, well, it's the 12th house of your sun, but you should be reading your chart based on your ascendant. But I actually feel it's possible to read both the ascendant and also the sun. I actually believe in solar astrology. I believe it works. So I think for a vast amount of water bearers, the last since 2008 has been a time of a sense of persecution at times for no apparent reason. And a lot of it with Pluto, you know, is to do with threat, because Pluto works in such a deep and psychological way. You and I may not even have been aware of what it is that people have found so unsettling about us. But the chances are someone somewhere has found something unsettling, because Aquarius people have a wonderful ability to be very individualistic. And some people can be very jealous of that, I feel. And even if you're someone who, like me, doesn't necessarily display outward signs of individualism with, say, very bright hair or nail polish or makeup, or your clothes aren't necessarily particularly out there and bright and bold and garish, somehow or another people can still, at a sensory level, pick up a threat if they feel that someone is their own person. So the problem for Aquarius people is getting so caught up in, why are people having these issues? I'm just good old me, who can be pretty decent at times despite my faults. And why are they finding this challenging? Because they're finding a threat in a completely unconscious way, I feel. But also, the other part of it is that us Aquarians may not have known ourselves very well 15 years ago. So it's been a huge opportunity to grow our inner world and become much more conscious of who we really are and what's really important for us. So the next 14 and a half weeks is going to be a bit of a refresher course around all those difficult things. But I think a lot of water bearers have been working so hard at it. I'm really looking forward to Aquarius welcoming Pluto on the 21st of January once more, its birthday. And of course there's a lot of great Aquarius transits coming in February this coming year, which really can supercharge the Aquarius side of life. and some of those more difficult things where, you know, I feel that Capricorn can be a bit clubby, but not necessarily in a particularly exuberant way. It's clubby because it's rather predictable, and it likes the club because it's a bit unspoken. So if you found some older people, or some people who are a little bit more set in their ways, the people who like to be in the club, but they don't tell you what the rules and regulations are for that club, because you're not going to come in their club anyway, because you've already decided that you're different. So you're about to enter a time through to 2043 when you are the club. We are the club. Go, Aquarius Club. So Pisces, for you, Pluto making its way in forward motion through the sign of Capricorn is about your connections, it's about your friendships, but it's also about your higher purpose. If you're someone who, as is often the case with Pisces people, who will go the extra mile to help other people, but if you don't feel after you've helped the other people that you're particularly appreciated or honoured for the friendship that you've shown, that can end up being very, very lonely. There may have been times, because the 11th house energy is a bit Aquarius, that you've actually removed yourself because you'd rather keep a distance. And of course, Neptune at times has seen you just want to be invisible. And Saturn has seen you feeling a little bit more grumpy, particularly if you're born earlier in Pisces, since the 7th of March this year. So complex stuff. Who are the people who are really worthy of your interaction with? Who is the network that really inspires you? Who are the people who've got the futuristic ideas that really excite you too? And those are the things you're going to be grappling with. Are you on track to reach your highest potential, to move towards a future which is really fulfilling for you? Are you connecting with people in a way that is uplifting? Or are there people who within your group or within your network that actually in some way or another are not necessarily good for you at some kind of psychological level? You know, is there some kind of society or community situation you belong to where you don't feel heard, you don't feel recognised? Well, remember, Pluto works inner and outer. That's the outer stuff. You can work with the inner stuff. So really, Pluto's asking you in this last 14.5 weeks push, in this phase, to just reorientate what you really want from your future and what your higher purpose truly is. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me for this Pluto special. Please like, comment, share, or subscribe.